Jadzia Dax wants Major Kira to bring Captain Baudet to her place for dinner. Mirror Universe Bareil is a better thief than Worf gave him credit for, and the Intendant says that Major Kira is the next best thing to her. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Seventh Rule with Cirroc Lofton.
Hello, hello.
My name is Ryan T. Husk. Today we're doing a review of Deep Space Nine, Season 6, Episode 8, Resurrection, written by Michael Taylor. And what do you know? Mr. Michael Taylor is joining us here today. Hello, Michael.
Hey, good to see you guys.
Great to see you. Thank you so much
Good to see you.
for taking the time.
Definitely got to start with those glasses, man. Those are some fresh glasses.
You know what? There's a little story behind them. These are pandemic glasses. I saw a newspaper LA Times story on Mark Mothersbaugh, former leader of Devo, and he's just into specs. And so he designed his own. And I thought, those look really cool. So I just ordered them. But, sight unseen, they came back, and I think they're made for like a somewhat bigger head than mine. But they freak people out, so I just wear them.
Devo, what a blast from the past.
Bro, yeah.
Really
cool.
Yeah. But I could change them if it's like, affecting the camera or whatever.
No, it looks cool. I like it.
Cirroc is an eyeglass connoisseur himself. Sometimes he shows up wearing some Avery Brooks-looking ones. I do want to also point out, this was directed by Mr. LeVar Burton also, so that's always got to be a cool thing as a writer when there's a director that you may or may not enjoy. And this is November 17th, 1997. Everybody listening in or watching, where were you in the middle of November 24 years ago? This is going to be a fun one. But yeah, again, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Everybody at home, if you don't know who Michael Taylor is, he wrote 4 episodes on Deep Space Nine, a whole ton on Voyager. There are a couple others he wrote on Deep Space Nine of note that you may want to look into: The Visitor and In the Pale Moonlight. And right now, everybody that doesn't know is going like, what? Michael Taylor wrote 2 of the 5 best episodes ever in Deep Space Nine? A lot of people say that those are their number 1 and number 2.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to start with all that, because I kind of want to talk about those a little bit.
We can.
How does this whole process work? Is it just like you're pitching them and they're saying, you know what, can you write this episode and we'll just check it out when you're done? Is that kind of how it goes?
Well, there is a process for a freelancer pitching a show. And I was a freelancer for all 4 Deep Space Nine episodes that I did. I was living in New York at the time. I had been a reporter, but at this point I was a musician with a rock band. And
what did you play?
I played guitar and still do. But my band would sit around and watch The Simpsons after practice. And one day I just had an idea for a Simpsons show. So I wrote it, it turned out to be more like a Simpsons movie. And I really didn't know what to do with it. But a friend of mine, a playwright who was living across the hall, came running up one night and said, you got to give me that script, because there's a guy downstairs at the bar who writes for Star Trek. And I got to show it to him. We lived upstairs from the bar, called The Edge. We actually lived over the Edge in the East Village in New York City. And that guy was Rene Echevarria, who lived across the street from us on East 3rd Street. And he took it, liked it, and showed it to his agent, and shrugged his shoulders. I had previously sent it to the Simpsons folks, who turned out had enough Simpsons scripts of their own. They didn't really need mine. But I also sent it to a young agent who was then at an agency called Triad, who was also very nice, Ari Emanuel. And he also said, good luck. But Rene said he should try pitching ideas to Star Trek, because they buy them. He was then a freelancer shortly to go on staff at The Next Generation. So I started pitching stories, and he would poo-poo them. Then I had a story that was so good, I said, I'm not even going to tell him and let him, harsh my buzz. So I did a bunch of research and wrote a whole story, a Next Generation script about Data and his sort of evil brother, Only in the end, it turns out the evil brother never was there, and it was Data who had a kind of psychic break over the deep-seated fear of how evil he might become if he actually had emotions. And that script got read by someone, and it got me the privilege, didn't get produced, of pitching to the show, which I did on the phone. And my first pitch session was with Ron Moore. And I kind of thought it'll be, this will be a give and take. We'll have a conversation. I had written out all my stuff by hand. And Ron just sort of sat back and said, all right, what have you got? And I was trying to read off my notes and whatever. And, it didn't go great. And I thought, well, that's it. I flubbed my one opportunity to maybe sell a show to one of my favorite shows. But then they called up and said, like a month later, so you want to do it again? And I said, okay, sure. I did not realize that there was a revolving door of writers coming into pitch again and again. And I realized that when I was receiving those pitches on Voyager. But at the time, it was like, okay, thank God I got a second chance. And this time, like a writer, I scripted the whole thing. It sounded like I was delivering it naturally, but I wrote every damn word down. And Renee was interested in 4 of like the things I pitched. And this one in particular, The Visitor, was the one that really got his attention. So I could go into the genesis of that idea, but what it ended up, then I got a chance to write a story document, and normally it would stop there. It's like kind of a rough outline of the pitch. But Ron Moore dug out my old script, which had been read by some reader, read it and said, oh, this is really good. We'll let him write a script. So that became my first produced episode of television. And I will say up front here that I wrote, created the idea, wrote the story and the first draft. But Renee Echevarria came on board and did a pass on it, which made it at least 2 to 3 times as good. So they were very kind to freelancers in the sense of, you do a good job, it's your idea, your name stays on it. But in that case, and later with my last episode for Deep Space Nine in the Pale Moonlight, was a similar kind of situation. I wrote a version.
Before we get into the Pale Moonlight, I just want to finish with The Visitor because, I mean, what a great story. And, it's been an episode that I've talked about pretty much endlessly. As I reflect on the work we did on DS9, that is pretty much, one of, if not the best as far as my participation is concerned. So I want to thank you for writing The Visitor, coming up with the idea. And I just want to get a little bit into the genesis of what that idea was, because I don't ever really recall seeing something that's written in such a way where a parent watches their child kind of age and die in front of them. I thought that's an original idea, and I just wanted to kind of get into where that comes from for you.
Well, it came to that most schmaltzy sort of inspiration. I was sitting around, I think, listening to this Harry Chapin song, Cats in the Cradle.
Yes.
I remember that. It's like, a distant father who's barely there for his son. And then his son, grows up and, is barely there for his dad. And, and the line, my son grew up just like me, and I was getting kind of teary because my parents were divorced. My dad was in Florida and we lived in New York. And I said, oh, man, that really hits home. And then I said, wait a second, your relationship with your father is nothing like these guys. Nonetheless, it was far better. We talked all the time. But it got me thinking of how a relationship, a parent or a child as they grow up, or parents sometimes, think of how quickly their kids grow up, almost like a series of snapshots. And I thought, what if those snapshots were all you had?
Wow.
And then I thought, well, Star Trek is magic. How might that happen? And and then we had Subspace Pocket, trapped in a subspace pocket, see the wormhole. So Deep Space Nine gave me that kind of gag, an opportunity, basically just a reason to tell that story. And then the other aspect of it was the reclusive writer. I remember J.D. Salinger did very few interviews, and one of the only interviews he did was with a high school student who somehow found their way to his door and got him to sit down and do an interview. And I thought, oh, so interesting. If a young person, comes out of the night, knocks on a famous writer's door, and that writer is Jake Sisko. Only, what the hell? He's old. And then the idea that he's going to tell the story only now because it's in a way going to be his last will and testament, because he's planning to kill himself to bring his dad back. So that's how that came together.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
and everybody at home that loves that Harry Chapin song, but they're thinking, what about Ugly Kid Joe? He covered it, and everybody knows it's not as good as the original. But that's so cool. And one thing, Cirroc, I know you want to say something. I just want to say real quick that that's got to be so freeing as a writer if you are writing for a show like Star Trek, to where almost anything you can think about, including bringing somebody back from the dead, whatever you want, you're like, hey, we could probably do it, even if it's on a holodeck, if it's visiting wormhole aliens, maybe Q comes and snaps this thing. You can literally have this playground to where any story is possible, and it's just got to be so freeing and exciting.
Well, I mean, that was the allure of the Star Trek from the beginning, and certainly as a writer on it, it was the freedom to tell stories that were essentially allegories. I mean, this was, before the whole sort of rise of serialized television. Star Trek was very episodic. Characters did grow; they had arcs, and Voyager certainly was on a mission that had a longer arc, and the same was built into Deep Space Nine. And yet, you still were afforded the opportunity to tell one-off stories that were just fun or provocative, made you think or feel, and that was what was great about it. And it was nominally a science fiction show, but within that genre, it could be a doctor show one week, or a lawyer show, or a detective show, or a spy show. All these things were possible. So that was my introduction to science fiction and genre writing, and it stayed with me. It was, any idea you could think of, you could find a way to tell. So it was incredible.
When you were telling the story just now about the song and the relationship between the father and son, you were starting to actually get emotional slightly, and I felt your voice cracking. And the interesting thing is that you were able to capture that same emotion in the episode, because as I watched The Visitor, I get that same emotion that you were just about to zone off into. And
even more so.
That's the brilliance. Yeah, and that's the brilliance of how you were able to take that thought and turn it into this piece of art, which we all appreciate. The other thing I wanted to say really quickly is how much I love Star Trek in general, the idea of a story telling a story about itself. I believe that in Far Beyond the Stars kind of did an example of that as well. The story was actually talking about itself in some type of way, and I felt like the Visitor is just an awesome way in which that was accomplished. And really quickly, love the reference to the J.D. Salinger that you made, because that's somebody who I was really influenced by growing up and reading Catcher in the Rye. I felt like I identified with that character in some type of way. So all great points that you made. But
can I just pause real quick for a second? Because Cirroc, you made a point, and I don't want it to go unnoticed or just kind of glossed over. But that's a phenomenal thing, to take an emotional feeling that you get from a song and transfer, more so than the story. It feels like what Cirroc is saying, like you transferred that emotion over to an episode of television. I'd never really seen or thought of that before, and that's a beautiful. It's a beautiful thing, and I just want to you kind of, Cirroc, you stopped me in my tracks. I was like, wow, I just kind of went off on that. But anyway, please continue. I just wanted to make sure that was really hit hard.
Well, I mean, another element of that, I mean, and this is the most romantic and emotional element in almost any story. It's almost the definition of the novel. It's the passage of time. Mm-hmm. Time is, it's mortality, which we all face in different ways at different stages of our lives, and certainly family is, plays into that whole theme as well. One of my favorite episodes of The Next Generation was The Inner Light, in which Captain Picard is marooned on a planet in his mind and lives an entire life. And then, comes out of it and is staring at a little flute that he, an actual artifact from that imagined life. And that is incredibly moving. Again, that sense of aging, of confronting mortality, of having kids and seeing them grow up. Those are just big elements that, can't fail but to, hook you with a big emotional wallop. But yeah.
Were you, when they were filming that, I mean, David Livingston was, I believe he was the director of that episode. Yeah, David Livingston directed that. Were you able to be on the set when they were doing that episode?
No, it was definitely not. Okay. But that episode did get nominated for a Hugo Award, and I did get to go to LA for that. And I met one of my future best friends there, another science fiction writer, and Ira Bear met me there. And I think it was like at a Radisson hotel or something. So I had my little possible winner speech prepared. And you get at a certain point, you're in the audience, and all of a sudden the paper sign that says Hugo Award starts peeling off the lectern, and underneath it says Radisson Hotels. This ain't the Oscars. Nonetheless, all those same emotions. And in the end, an episode of Babylon 5 won instead. A piece of shit. But I got to spend the evening in the so-called Losers Lounge with all the cool writers of both short stories and novels and television, commiserating and getting drunk. And it was a community of science fiction folks, and it was really cool. And I told Ira about the speech I'd prepared, and he said, "You listen," he said, "thank God you didn't have to give it."
Oh, that's Ira, all right. What's funny though? I'm picturing all the people in the quote Losers Lounge. Like, if you win, you're like, the Hugo Awards, beautiful, amazing, so good. But then if you don't win, you're like, the sticker was peeling. This place sucks. Let's go get a beer.
I'm sure it would have been like a totally different experience had I won. And
the lights were shimmering. The chandelier was.
Yes,
glistening.
Until they gonged me off the stage, or with
the hook, the old hook at the Apollo, right?
But before we got started, I
want to thank one more person.
But before we got started, you did tell us a little bit, about in the Pale Moonlight, which is another like blockbuster, legendary episode that you. You had your hand in, and I just wanted to say, because I remember watching this episode saying, God, I love the way Sisko is talking to the computer and having this moment of therapy. Tell me a little bit about that episode and your feelings for that.
All right. Well, I love that episode. But it's not the episode I wrote. It's the episode ultimately Ron Moore wrote. But to me, it epitomized everything, the best of Deep Space Nine and its darkness. Even watching it, I think I was in a hotel somewhere watching on TV, it looked dark. I don't know if it was the lighting design or something, but it looked like, it had that vibe of a John le Carré story or something. But this was the last couple things I did, I think, including Resurrection, did not start from original ideas. My second one, Things Past? Yeah, that was sort of an original idea. Like, could Odo form a great link just with his close buddies, and what would happen then? But this one, they brought me in and had an idea for a spy show. And I think I had the idea of a historical incident known as the Zimmerman Telegram. And that's where, basically false evidence was created to bring over an enemy onto our side, something like that. And so that was the genesis of that. And I remember we just called it The Ink because it was basically a MacGuffin in the break. But to me, it was really interesting having started as a young reporter, having, started Jake, I guess, on his path to becoming a writer in The Visitor. If it wasn't, I think your character already had shown his inclination to be a writer. But here that he could be a kind of reporter who latches onto this story that is much bigger than he realizes was really attractive to me. So that's what I pitched, and that's what they signed off on, and that's what I wrote. And I think it was, it was great, and it was another great episode for Jake Sisko. However, I think after that, the writers got around and said, this is just my theory. Ron would have to tell you what happened, but this is too big. This has to be on the captain's, head. This is something he's got to grapple with, and he's got to do. And then Ron went on and wrote what I think is one of the best episodes of Deep Space Nine, among the many great episodes that the staff did. And I also love the wonderful framing of the captain's log. And at the end, he says, I can live with it. I'll have to live with it. I can live with it. And he looks at the camera and he says, erase log. And it just goes black, which is way before Tony, for Tony Soprano's screen went black. So preempting David Chase. Michael, erasing the record.
Real quick, we only have a couple minutes left before our break, and we're definitely going to talk about Resurrection on the other side of the break. But before we flip over, I always get really curious when we talk to writers that threw out pitches and stuff. And we know some writers pitched one thing and got one thing picked up. Others got 4 things picked up, but they pitched 50. Can you tell us one or two of your favorite pitch ideas that did not get picked up, or something that you thought was interesting? Because to us and the fans, we always say it feels like we just get an extra episode of Star Trek when we hear your idea.
I had so many. God, I'd have to go back in my files to if I still exist, to see something I pitched that didn't, that I wished I had sold. I was just happy that, I sold the ones that I did, and I think they were, among my best pitches. So I can't offer any elucidation there. Perhaps during the break I can go look something up. But
just a little bit piggyback to that question. The Visitor did come in the 4th season. So were you already were you 3 seasons current watching the episodes, and you had known where we're at, or were there?
Yes.
Was there something?
Well, when I set out to try to sell a pitch to the next generation, when Renee suggested I try doing that, I hadn't really watched the show. I'd watched the original when I was younger, but so I made a study of it. I watched it episode by episode. I read all the guides and Bibles that folks like Mark Altman then were writing, analyzing it. where you heard snippets of the writer's process, which gave me an insight into how they came up with ideas and how they progressed toward production. So I made the same study of Deep Space Nine. But along the way, watching The Next Generation, I said, oh, this is great. I came to, quickly love the show. And also the very measured theatrical pace of it and the kind of philosophical outlook of it. It really hooked me. But yes, I made I was watching as a fan, but also as someone saying, this is how I'm going to make my bones as a writer. And so I watched Deep Space Nine. And the fourth season for me was, a number of these shows, it's interesting. The Next Generation, I don't think was as great as it became in the first 2 seasons.
Right.
But these shows all got at least 7 seasons, and they all found their stride. And to me, I think 4th season was a big turn for Deep Space Nine. This is as a fan, because you added the Defiant to the mix. I believe that was the beginning of the 4th season. Because you had a space station and Worf. You had a space station. There was a wonderful environment, but you added a starship so you could go places, because that was, going boldly was the essence of Star Trek. And now you could boldly go, if only to the wormhole, but anywhere, and it just really came together. And yes, Worf joined. So I was very excited to be part of getting my start in that 4th season of the show.
So let's take a quick break right here. And I know, yes, the fans are screaming in my ear right now, virtually, of course. And Sisko shaved his head and grew a goatee. Yes, we know. That was also.
He went back. He accessed his inner hawk.
Yes.
We probably should.
Yeah. All right. So we'll take a quick break. Everybody at home, stick around. Actually, you know what? Real quick as well. Michael Taylor is working on a show called Pantheon. It's going to be coming out next year on AMC. It's animated. Stay tuned for that. Check it out. If there's more to be said, just say it on the other side of the break. But it looks like maybe there is more to be said. So we'll be right back on The Seventh Rule.